us. My name is Frances Johnson. I'm host of the Eccles Business Buzz podcast here at the David Eccles School of Business. And I'm just really excited to welcome you for this awesome panel. The topic of mental health for me is very personally impactful and meaningful, and to me professionally as well. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. So I'm excited to get into it together here tonight. We have an awesome panel of experts. A knockout panel is what I wrote in my notes, but then I felt silly saying it, but I just said it and talked about feeling silly about it. They're going to walk us through the economic value of mental health. So we'll be talking about the importance of evidence-based mental health care for children and young adults, like the students we have here at the Eccles School, how mental health and mindfulness practices in the workplace can improve a company's bottom line, and the relationship between mental health care and a thriving economy. I also hope we get to talk about something that someone said to me the other day, the human bottom line. So not just the company bottom line, but the human bottom line. We'll also be playing a few clips from the Eccles Business Buzz podcast, and we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So I hope we have a really interactive session tonight. As always, we hope that you'll subscribe to the Eccles Business Buzz podcast. We just launched a new season a couple weeks ago. We would love for you to listen in and hear all about the great conversations that we have there. And we hope that you will share anything that you learned tonight on your own social media channels. If you're on Instagram, you can tag us at Eccles Alumni and use the hashtag Eccles Business Buzz, and we would be happy to send you some swag. And before I forget, which I almost did, let me also say, if this is a topic that is interesting to you, you have another chance, another great event coming up on May 15th. This will be hosted by the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute here at the David Eccles School of Business. Their Newsmaker Breakfast on May 15th will also be a discussion about mental health, including a sort of status report on the Utah Behavioral Health Master Plan. So some state leaders and some representatives from the Eccles School here. That's from 8 to 9:30 at the Thomas S. Monson Center, and you can find more information about that online as well. So we hope you can join us there as well. Okay, let's get into it. Let me introduce our panel. I'm going to start at the far end here with Ross Van Vranken. He has been a leader in behavioral health dating back to the 1980s. He was executive director for Huntsman Mental Health Institute, formerly UNI, with University of Utah Health. The institute combines the strength of one of America's leading research universities with the nation's best integrated mental health crisis care model. Their continuum of care includes a 161-bed acute psychiatric and substance use hospital and a 24-hour walk-in crisis care center. They serve all ages, disorders, and socioeconomic groups. Ross's primary role was to ensure the Institute's commitment to providing the highest standard of care across the full spectrum of behavioral health services, which includes outpatient specialty programs and crisis diversion services. He is responsible to assure the integration between clinical care, education, research, and was tasked with maintaining Huntsman Mental Health Institute's standing as a community leader in the area of behavioral health. Ross is a native of Utah, receiving his undergraduate degree in psychology and a master's degree in social work, both from the University of Utah. Welcome, Ross. All right, in the middle here we have Joni Clark. She is the Director of Development at the Children's Center Utah. Joni brings over 20 years of experience in community development, nonprofit leadership, and mental health care to her role. Known for her strategic approach to fundraising and her ability to build lasting relationships, Joni has played a key role in advancing support for children's mental health services. She holds a BS in sociology from the University of Utah and a Master of Educational Counseling from the University of Phoenix. She lives here in Utah with her husband, her 2 children, and their mini golden doodle, Lucy. And I think we should give an extra round of applause to Joni, who is filling in last minute, and we're so grateful to have her here with us today. All right, and then here to my immediate left is Glen Kreiner, the LS Skaggs Presidential Chair in Business Ethics here at the David Eccles School of Business. He has taught courses and workshops on topics such as mindfulness, interpersonal skills, authenticity, identity-based leadership, and teamwork. His research focuses on topics such as workplace mental health, stigma, identity, mindfulness, work and non-work boundaries, something I think we can all learn more about, ethics, and workers with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Glen is currently helping to lead a national initiative comprising hundreds of partner organizations to end the stigma surrounding mental illness. Outside of work, he enjoys traveling. We were just chatting about some exciting summer travel plans, cooking and theater, especially when he can do those things with his wife and 3 children. And I know Glen's son is here with us tonight. So welcome, Glen. All right, here we go, my friends. To start off, Glen and Ross have both been so kind to be guests on the podcast. Joni, we'll get you here. We're going to hear some clips from Ross tonight. And to start us off, we're going to play a clip where I feel like Ross really beautifully sums up what mental health is, what we're talking about when we talk about mental health. And I think that it will be a great framework for our discussion as we get into it tonight. So let's hear the clip.
When you're talking about mental health, you're talking about well-being, that sense of well-being. I'm okay, and I know how to navigate the problems in my life, and I get through it, and I have an adequate amount of resiliency and reserve to take on struggles. I ask for support when I need it. I'm willing to talk about what's going on with myself. And that's really what it is, just that sense of well-being. That's what mental health is, where you're able to engage in your life in a way that represents who you are and what you want to do. And so you could be active, you're a good worker, you're a good spouse, family member, all those kinds of things. You can actually engage in that in a way that, again, sustains you. And when that all goes awry, everything goes in the opposite direction. So, you know, you hide out, you're not productive, and you're not engaged in your life or in the social network that you're a part of.
All right, Ross, you've been in this space for a long time. And as we think about this great definition that you gave us of mental health, let's start off by talking about why is this something that's not just important for individuals to understand and be aware of, but for companies and communities to be thinking about as well?
All right, well, I'll start out with companies and organizations. If you think about it, organizations actually pay for health care. Why do they do that? Because they want a healthy workforce. They not only want a healthy workforce, they want you to have a healthy family, because they know if you come to work and your family's struggling and you're preoccupied, you're not as productive. So from a return on investment and from a financial standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to provide health care and make sure you have a healthy workforce. But that's not the reason to do it. The real reason to do it is that to have a strong and healthy organization, you need good leadership and a strong culture. And culture really relies on people being able to come to work, enjoy work. You create an environment where people want to come there, where they're engaged, it's collaborative, it's transparent, everyone understands what the purpose is for being there, and that you matter. And mattering is almost a primal piece of who we all are. Everybody needs to know that they matter in certain situations. So that's really what it's about. How do you create a strong culture that sustains everybody, and people come and they're productive because they're present, and actually it kind of serves not only the employees and their families, but also the community. It spills over in the community, and it also makes us for a strong organization, a strong business.
Glen, a lot of your research is in this area, the relationship between our work lives and our mental health lives. When we, to continue what Ross has started us on here today, this idea of building culture and how to build cultures where people feel like they matter. So addressing that human bottom line that then can address our economic bottom line as well. Maybe take us from bad to good. I almost said from bad to worse, but that's not what we want to do. Take us from bad to good. What do companies do that really doesn't work? And then take us to what can companies do to really make a difference in this space?
Yeah, sure. On the bad, yes, thank you for starting with the bad. We get that over with, right? On the bad side, if you hear the word toxicity, a toxic workplace, a toxic supervisor, toxic manager, and culture is manifest throughout the organization, but people experience the interactions of their supervisors and managers day to day. So if the supervisors and managers are promoting this sort of toxicity where it's highly competitive and a cutthroat environment, or if there are policies that are prohibitive toward getting people's mental health access. So if it's hard for people to get the care that they need, hard to get time off, hard to have flexibility in their schedules, or if they don't have a whole lot of autonomy in the work that they do, or if there are peers in a team that are fostering that toxic kind of environment. So really we can think big picture cultural, leader, top-down problems. We can think manager, supervisor, teammates, but also the policies that might be getting in the way of people getting the help that they need. So then on the good side, in terms of things that organizations can do, and we'll really be unpacking a lot of that tonight, but big picture, again, we want to think about culture, policies, and at a more local interaction level. So in terms of positive cultures, are leaders talking about their mental health journeys? Are they using words about mental health and well-being? Are they sharing their own stories? And are they encouraging managers, supervisors, HR leaders to share their stories and to use mental health language on a regular basis? That top-down kind of positive effect on the culture we know has really, really important positive effects, because then it normalizes mental health as a legitimate topic in the lunchroom, in a team meeting, after a team meeting. But if leaders aren't sharing their stories, if it's all just on paper and it's just sort of policies hidden in a drawer or written on a plaque somewhere, then that creates this sense of mysteriousness or mystique of, oh, we can't talk about this here, or I don't know if I can talk about it here. I'm not going to be the pioneer. So we know that leader discourse and action is huge. Creating opportunities for employees to talk with each other about their mental health journeys and challenges. And that could be employee resource groups. It could be ally programs where people are paired together with people with similar interests around mental health. It can be mental health first aid training. A lot of organizations now are providing this. So just like regular physical first aid, think about the mental health version. We're not asking people to become psychiatrists and psychologists and clinical social workers. That's not the manager's job or the supervisor's job. But we can become conversant and fluent in mental health terminology so that we can talk with each other and connect people to the resources that professionals can offer to them. So there's some of the big picture things that we can be doing on the good side.
I love this example of just creating safe spaces. I think this is also a buzzword that we hear in lots of places, not just in our workplace, but this idea that we want environments where I can bring my whole self and where I can feel comfortable to tell my story. Ross, this is something that you and I talked about when you were on the podcast, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later tonight, but just this idea that mental health discourse in general has become much more open than it was in the past, and that storytelling is such a big part of that, and how important it is to develop the skills ourselves and the courage ourselves to share those stories, but also to create those environments where other people can feel comfortable to bring that part of themselves as well. Ross also talked about when he came on the podcast that mental health is the #1 disability in the world right now, which was surprising to me. And I think to really make an impact in addressing that, we need to start early, right? So we're talking about the mental health of children and of young people, like the students that we have here at the Eccles School. Joni, I'd love to bring you into the conversation here and have you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at the Children's Center Utah and why addressing mental health early, so not waiting until we're in a workplace, maybe not even waiting until we're on a college campus, is so critical for setting people up for success personally, but then also as they become professionals.
Yes, thank you. So the Children's Center Utah provides mental health counseling services to children and their families. So we serve children, infants to toddlers and their families. So we're talking from the very beginning. And why it's so important is so that they get those foundational skills from the very, very beginning. And they are taught those skills so that when they do enter the workforce or they are older and they're on campuses, they have learned the skills to talk about their emotions, kind of what both of you said. They can talk about their feelings, and then when they get into the workplace, it's not foreign to them. And then they're molded into great leaders, right? We want leaders in the workplace who aren't afraid to talk about their mental health, who are breaking those stigmas. And so studies show that if you intervene early at a young age with mental health, then it sets them on a trajectory when they're older. And so that's why it's so important for the workplace and to have mental health skills so that they could really talk about it when they're older and be leaders. One of the things we do also at the Children's Center Utah, so we provide outpatient family therapy. We have a therapeutic preschool program, so it's group therapy, intensive group therapy for ages 2, 3, 4, and 5. So they're learning those social skills on how to interact with their peers. We're also providing training and consultation for other providers in the community, and we're also training social service providers on how to be good leaders. A lot of times social service providers can experience secondary trauma. And so teaching them how to work with each other on how to take care of themselves so that they can also take care of the people they're leading and the people they're serving. So that's another component.
As a mom, I have an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, just since Sunday. He just had his birthday on Sunday. And an 8-year-old, and I've just been amazed at what they're learning in school. Like, they come home saying things like, don't have your ego out of balance. And, my daughter told me, like, I need to get my PFC under control. And I was like, your what? This is my 8-year-old. She said, my prefrontal cortex. And she had this whole amygdala, prefrontal cortex. It had like a hand motion, right? They're talking about pebble problems versus boulder problems. And I said to my husband, I feel like we need to go to elementary school because we do not, like, when he and I are talking about our emotions, we do not have this language to talk about them, They're just so much more prepared, but and I'm so glad, because I think it will just set them up for so much more success as they get older. We just talk all the time. They're so much more aware of their feelings. They're so much better able even than we feel like we are. I'm like, man, I'm paying like $200 a month in therapy to figure out what they're learning in 3rd grade, So I'm really grateful for that, and I do think it is so important, and that carries over even into the college environment. Glen, you've been a big part of the push here at the Eccles School to really focus on mental health and well-being. I know some of our staff and community friends here have been part of that as well. Can you talk about some of the things we're doing here at the Eccles School to incorporate this type of mental health and wellness awareness, the language, the environmental safety, and how that is part of setting our students up for success? And I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it's just such an important connection for us to remember and understand that we're talking about setting up children, setting up students, setting up adults, so that they can have a sense of well-being, like Ross said. But what does that well-being give us? What does it prepare us to do? It prepares us to be productive. It prepares us to be collaborative. It prepares us to be innovative. It prepares us to contribute in our communities and in our workplaces in a way that we might not be able to otherwise if we didn't have that. So how are we setting up our students to be better and stronger economic contributors and community contributors?
It's a great question. And one thing that I haven't done so far, but I'm going to start doing starting next year, is have your daughter Francisca as a guest lecturer in my class, because she's got a great vocabulary
She would
around this
love
stuff.
it. She would eat that up.
So I always say, like, I'm not a mental health professional, right? I'm a business PhD, but I'm a professional who studies mental health. So I would love hearing these stories when we have this next generation who are getting taught about brain health and mental well-being, because our generation, we didn't talk about that kind of stuff at all. It was very suppressed. So to your question about some of the things that we're doing here at the Eccles School, we can think curricular issues and we can think non-curricular issues. So those two categories. On the curricular side, we have an undergraduate course that just started this year. It's required for each of our freshman students, called Responsibilities of Business Leaders. And we have a lot of topics in that curriculum, but the main point of it is to help them prepare for what kinds of responsibilities they will have in the future. So how do they make ethical decisions? How do they create a sense of belonging? How do they think about sustainability goals for the planet and for corporations? And we include a mental health component in that course. So if you think about years from now, each of the graduating classes starting a few years from now will have had at least one component of a course on mental health specific to the business context, in which we're talking about, like we're doing tonight, how do we create mentally healthy cultures? What actions can leaders take, and what responsibilities do they have as leaders to help create that kind of a workplace? So that's in our undergraduate program. In our master's programs, I teach in a couple of our MBA programs and our Master's of Business Creation programs, and I include a mental health day in each of the courses that I teach, where we have 2, 3, maybe 4 hours, depending upon the course, where we're looking at mental health issues from a managerial and leadership lens. So part of how I do that is having students walk through for themselves some exploration about mental health issues, but also what does it mean to create that culture, be an example for people. And big picture, what we're trying to do is, like you say, create systems, change systems and cultures, and create leaders and shape leaders and thought leaders for the future, because we know they have that trickle-down effect. So that's on the curricular side. On the non-curricular side, we have different programs. There's counseling programs at the university, et cetera. Specific here to the business school, we have what's called our In a Pinch program. And it's a multifaceted approach to student wellness, what we like to call a holistic approach. So it could be that someone's short on food and they're in a pinch for not having the food that they need. It could be that they're in a pinch for needing advice or counseling. So it's sort of a financial wellness, mental health wellness overall approach that's available for all of the business school students here, because we recognize that it's not just in the classroom as we try to recognize that whole person. You have to look both in and out of the classroom.
And we know when those needs aren't met for students, they can't concentrate in the classroom. They can't engage in the activities, the extracurricular activities, the internships that we have here. It affects their ability to succeed as students.
And similar to what Ross was saying a few minutes ago about from the workplace standpoint, workplaces have invested in physical health for decades because we want people to show up well and healthy. Similarly, we want that for mental health in the workplace. We want it for physical and mental health for the students, because the goal is to be coming to college and not just, take some exams and write some papers and that cognitive stuff. That's important for sure, but also the well-rounded person, like the lifelong learner, and mental health is something we can all be lifelong learners around.
Well, one reason this is such a sticky wicket, as it were, is because there has been a lot of stigma around mental health, around talking about it, around seeking help when we need it. Let's listen to another clip from Ross talking about this.
When I was first in this field, of course, people didn't even talk about it. There was so much shame and embarrassment connected with it. The families, individuals who had psychiatric needs would not talk about it. and really just shied away from anything that would actually insinuate that they had some kind of mental illness. A lot's changed in the last 20, 30 years. You know, the advent of new treatments, new medications, better outcomes have all kind of aided in terms of people feeling more comfortable getting care and also seeing results from treatment, which has made a difference. I think currently that, you know, we're starting to see people really begin to tell their story. And I think we all recognize how powerful stories are. And so when people get out there and tell their story, I think it really helps inform others about really what is mental illness and that it really is just another part of healthcare and really shouldn't be considered anything else. And it's really opened up the dialogue between the community in general, and particularly the younger population is much more willing to engage in conversation around mental illness and substance use disorder. Clearly, the COVID pandemic really emphasized the importance of mental health and really got everyone talking about it. And of course, the media coverage with all that has really kind of pushed it. And so it's just much different now.
Ross, you and I talked about how lucky we are to have a resource like Huntsman Mental Health Institute here in the state, and how remarkable it is that the Huntsman family has been willing to put their name on an institute like that and to really invest because of their own family and personal experiences, to invest in a really public way in mental health and improving our mental health care in the state and our outcomes. Can you talk a little bit about the work the Institute is doing to really get at this stigma piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, they made a significant contribution to come in and change the way mental health is viewed on a national level. We're talking about policy, payment reform, structure, virtually everything from A to Z in terms of how we've thought about mental health and mental illness in this country for decades, going back in the 40s somewhere. And so the focus now is to really continue that journey. It's, you know, we're looking at charting this out 10 years. You're looking at a new generation that you want to bring along, much like the third graders. And by the way, there are other people who should check their ego somewhere. But anyway, so yeah, and so we're going to stay focused on trying to change the narrative, normalizing the mental health experience. I mean, my hope is that where we come out of this, people talk about mental health in the same way they talk about physical health. So if you're in a conversation, there's just kind of a fluid conversation going back and forth, and it's not a big, oh, I got to be quiet and listen to this, and you know, and I don't understand it. And so that everybody understands that this is just a normal part of how we all live. And during different parts of our lives, we can struggle with our own mental health. And it's okay to struggle with it and ask for help and be able to kind of move on beyond that. But we're going to focus a lot on telling stories. We're going to focus on podcast and social media. We're going to focus on trying to partner like we are with the Jazz on the Safe UT app. We're going to do a whole bunch of stuff like that. In Salt Lake County, we just recently opened up a 80,000 square foot crisis care center down on 33rd South between 9th and 10th West. And one of the reasons we did that is to make sure that we could change the trajectory in terms of people with mental health issues going to jail and also go into emergency rooms. Now, emergency rooms are wonderful if you need that level of care, not so great for mental health. And so really what we've got, we set up a receiving center where people can go in and stabilize for 23 hours. They have a whole bunch of outpatient services, free dental clinic. We work with the dental school here, the law school, free legal clinic. We did a whole bunch of services to try and help the community, because what we discover, a lot of people don't know where to go. If you're in crisis, where do you go? You know, most people go to emergency room. We want them to go to the receiving center. And we want people to define their own crisis. We're not going to try and define that for them. So a lot of resources in there. We've partnered with a lot of community centers, community programs that have their case managers in there, so we can do warm handoffs, so we don't have gaps in treatment and a whole bunch of stuff. So we're really kind of pulling back a little bit. We're going to stay informed on the national level. There are about 300 corporations that are involved on a national level, and part of what Glen's doing. And so we're going to stay informed, but we're going to kind of pull and really kind of focus on Utah a little bit more here in the next year or so. So that's kind of what we're doing now, but a whole bunch of strategies around this stuff.
And I love, thinking about a partnership with an organization like the Utah Jazz. Again, just opening up the conversation in these more prominent spaces, right? We saw it on Ted Lasso. If there's any Ted Lasso fans out there, it's getting in lots of places, which is so important. Glen, Ross teed you up here, but you've been involved with Huntsman Mental Health Institute on some of these more national campaigns that are also geared towards reducing mental health stigma, including the National Stop Stigma campaign. Tell us a little bit about that work.
Yeah, so Stop Stigma Together is an initiative that we started about 3.5 years ago here at the University of Utah, working with the Huntsman Mental Health Institute. And we now have about 300 partner organizations across the country. And each of the main mental health organizations, and by that I mean not-for-profit organizations such as the JED Foundation, One Mind at Work, but also several federal agencies are part of Stop Stigma Together. And we also have corporations that are partners with us, as well as individual people and groups. And the way that it works is we have a few different structures, but one of the main things we do is we've set up several task forces, and each task force focuses on a different part of society. So we have a legal system task force that looks at mental health in the criminal justice system and how reforms in the criminal justice system can help people get the help that they need instead of just being sort of rotated through the justice system over and over and not get the help they need. We have a children, youth, and family task force that folks from your organization have participated in. We have a journalism task force. Next week, I'm going down to Atlanta. We're going to do a summit for news executives. And part of that summit is to talk to news executives about how they can report and teach and train their reporters and producers to report about mental health in more accurate and more positive and destigmatizing ways. And the other half of that summit is going to be how they, as CEOs and managers, can take care of journalists and writers and producers, because journalism is a very high-stress occupation. It's come under attack a lot recently. So we're doing sort of both things at that summit. So we have multiple other task forces, like Entertainment Committee, where we work with people in Hollywood that are writers and producers about how to integrate better writing stories, more true storylines, ones that resonate with people. Last summer, we did a summit here in Salt Lake City, and we had the Entertainment Task Force brought up a panel of folks from the entertainment community to talk about how people have tried to do that in Hollywood and be more responsible. So these task forces is one way that we get things done, and also these summits. Some of the summits are specialized, and some of them are open for all of our partner organizations. Last week, we did a mini summit of mental health leaders in Washington, D.C., so we had people flying in from all over the country. And the agenda was to talk about how to address mental health issues the next several months in the United States, because so many things are happening that are changing the mental health landscape. So it was a meeting to bring people together to say, how can we get on the same page and have some united messaging around the needs for mental health. So those are some of the things that we do at the Stop Stigma Together initiative, and it's all pointing toward destigmatization of mental health, because we know that stigma is one of the biggest barriers for people getting the help that they need. And we know that a lot of employees won't talk to their HR folks, or they won't use the employee assistance programs because of stigma. They're afraid to talk about it at work, et cetera. So the whole initiative is about destigmatizing and just getting mental health to be a normal thing, like Ross was talking about. It's like physical health and mental health. We just want to normalize that.
Joni, I would imagine that young children and young adults face maybe some unique barriers when it comes to mental health. Some of it could be not quite knowing how to talk about it, not always understanding our feelings, but maybe some other factors. I don't know why I'm trying to list them when what I'm trying to do is ask you to tell us what they are. Talk to us about those barriers that are maybe unique to children and to young people as they try to take care of their mental health.
Yeah, so a lot of the stigmas facing very young children is that people think that very young children don't have mental health needs, which is so far from the truth. Young children, even infants, all the way down to infants, have mental health and mental health needs at times. And so that's a big stigma that we're trying to help with, is to educate the public on that. And also, their parents may need some resources or help. I think all of us have been around a child or helped raise a child, can know it can be very difficult. There's no book that tells us exactly how to do it. And so if a parent or a caregiver is struggling with their own mental health, that can trickle down and translate onto the child as well. So the Children's Center Utah does a lot of work to break the stigma by educating parents and caregivers on how to help themselves so that they can help the children. We also are doing a lot of work. We commissioned a study from the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute in about 5 years ago that really looked at the data in the state of Utah around children's mental health. We knew it was a problem and we didn't realize how staggering. And so we're trying to really share the data and so educate about the needs in the community, because I think people, like you said, they just don't understand the effects of children's mental health and how big of a crisis it is in our state. So we're educating on that. After the study came out, we convened a working group, a cross-sector working group of about 40 different organizations to try to come up with solutions on how to address it. So all of those studies and the working group solutions and recommendations are on our website, so you can access that. So that's what we're trying to do to break the stigma, is educate, provide resources. We also host a professional development conference every fall where we bring keynote speakers in to talk about how to break the stigma and how to provide solutions. And then we also have a grant through the state of Utah where we can provide up to 100 hours a month to any provider working with young children of free webinars, training webinars of the importance of infant early childhood mental health, and then also free consultation with one of our experts. So any provider that's working with a child and they need some extra support, they can access that for free, up to 100 hours with our experts.
I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. I'm going off script a little bit, but just thinking about stigma, thinking of myself as a parent, and there are lots of different caregivers who interact with our children in lots of different capacities. How easy it is to internalize when our own children are struggling, and to think, well, it's because I'm a bad mom, right? Or we think that when we're struggling at work, oh, it's because I'm a bad employee, right? We internalize these stigmas ourselves. And I think that then that can make it really difficult to make the effort to access the help that the people in our orbit need, because we think that doing that is admitting some kind of failure on our own part. So I think something to also think about as we think about stigma is just, right, if my son, who I feel like I talk about at every podcast party because he's just like takes up so much of my brain power and my life force, but if he wakes up at 6 a.m. and climbs on the roof and falls down and breaks his leg, which hasn't happened yet, but never say never, I'm gonna take him to the emergency room and I'm not gonna be super embarrassed about that, right? But if he's struggling with mental health, maybe my approach or my internalized feeling as a parent is a little bit different. So I don't know, any thoughts on that as caregivers, as we're interacting with students, as we're working as parents, as bosses? How do we also sort of overcome that internalized stigma that we might have so that we can really work on behalf of other people?
So much of what you're talking about seems to stem from like a self-doubt that we have about ourselves, right? In all of these different contexts and all of these different roles that we play. But there is a club for people who experience self-doubt. It's called humanity.
I was going to guess life, but okay.
But I say that as a joke, but to normalize, right? Again, normalizing that term, if you don't remember any other weird word we say tonight, remember normalizing. It's to make normal, right? So we should be making normal the fact that we have these self-doubts, or that we take ownership for our work, our children, our families, our communities. And there's a healthy type of ownership that we all want to have because we're all part of it together, but we can go too far in terms of that internalization. So whether it's that stigma component driving it or some kind of responsibility, it's about that balance. But that normalization thing is just so important for us.
Yeah, I agree. Again, it's telling stories. It's also a matter of kind of modifying, tapping down some of the mental chatter that we all have. And how do you get out of your own head and just act? You know, you spend too much time in your head and you're in trouble. So that's part of it. This is just, I agree with that. This is just a normal condition. This is kind of the universal neurosis we all live with.
Yeah, I would just say storytelling for sure, leading by example and talking about it. And I like to say, giving yourself grace and giving grace to everybody else.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great segue into what I would love to talk about next, which is some tips from each of you about maintaining our own mental health. This can be I think we're talking about evidence-based care. There are some things that we know work sort of all the time, no matter what-ish. But then there are things that all of us do personally to sort of safeguard our own mental health. So let's start with Ross and move down the line. I'd love to hear your top tips for maintaining mental health, something that's worked for you or something that you've seen work for other people.
Well, I think it's a little bit individual. I mean, how do you kind of calm your nervous system, you know? And there are different ways of doing that: mindfulness, meditation, activity, getting up and moving, going for a walk in the sunshine, all those kinds of things. There are a lot of things you can do self-soothing. You can do this, and you know, and it's pretty much individual. What helps calm you when you're really anxious and struggling and can't concentrate and feel like running and hiding? You know, how do you bring yourself back? How do you get yourself back in the presence where you're actually calm enough to kind of make the next step? So I think those are some things that I think work, but you have to know yourself well enough to know, how do I calm down? How do I calm my nervous system?
So I'll just break the stigma and say I am proud to say I have anxiety, ADHD, and a little bit of OCD. So I've learned over the years that it is individualized and what works for me and
That's
what
nothing.
doesn't. Yeah. Well, those are the things I decided to disclose. And I just have learned over the years what works for me and what doesn't, and it just really depends on the day. So even coming here today, I had a really busy schedule at work. I was running, and so I just put on Headspace, the app, on the way over here, and listened to a little meditation on the way, even though I was driving, and it really helped just kind of center and calm down before I came so that I could be present for you all. And then, of course, turning off my cell phone, because that is a big distraction for me. So being present, I try to be present more and more, especially as my kids are getting older and the world is getting more busy and more chaotic. That's how I try to be mindful.
I would echo the mindfulness and meditation. This is something we talked about in the previous episode of The Buzz. The mindfulness, there's so much good research now focusing on the positive outcomes of mindfulness practices, meditation, yoga, journaling, etc. And what's really cool from like a management professor side of the mindfulness research is that the benefits aren't just for the person who's practicing mindfulness. There's really interesting leadership studies now that show a positive spillover from the mindful practitioner onto coworkers and subordinates, even if they aren't mindfulness practitioners themselves. How cool is that? So you see a positive effect on the people around you when you take on mindfulness practices. So when people say like, oh, I don't want to take the time for myself, or it's selfish for self-care, I always say to them, one of the best things you can do for your employees, your teammates, your family, your friends, is to take care of yourself through mental health and mindfulness practices. It is not selfish to do self-care. We have to really reinforce that, because a lot of folks were raised with a mindset of take care of others first. I've heard a lot of mental health professionals use the metaphor of like the flight attendant safety instructions when they talk about the oxygen mask dropping. They say, put your mask on first and then help others. And they do that because if you pass out, who's helping your kid, right? Well, from a mental health standpoint, if you're not well enough to help the coworker, the teammate, the subordinate, the supervisor, the family member, then you're doing a disservice to them. So big believer in the mindfulness practices. For therapy, therapy works really well for a lot of people. Don't be ashamed to do it. Medication works really well for a lot of people. Medication is a lot of trial and error from what I hear from the medical professionals of the right medicine for the right person and the right dosage, and it can take some experimentation. So I think patience is part of it. So for me, as a fellow ADHDer, right, we're gonna have a little group meeting up here afterward if anyone has questions. Medication and therapy are great. Also, hobbies that are meaningful to you. So I love getting out into nature. I love running. Our family, as you heard in the introduction, we love theater and cooking and doing those things together as sort of positive creative outlets I'm a big fan of.
The other thing you can do is put your iPad pods in and rock out.
That is, we have, I actually read about this, about the power of dance parties, and we actually we don't in my family enjoy cooking, I'm sorry to say, but we sort of take the edge off with dinner time dance parties. If we're all cooking together, everyone gets to pick their song, and we dance in the kitchen to take the edge off. I think these are especially important. We were chatting a little bit before we sat down. Just right now feels like a lot for a lot of people. There is bummer stuff going on in a lot of places. We see mental health suffering now in particular, and I think being aware of what works for us and how we can take care of ourselves so we can take care of other people is so important. I would also say when Glenn came on the podcast, we talked a lot about curiosity and trying different things on. I'm curious about being this type of person, so I'm going to try on that identity or that hobby or those habits. I think we can take that approach with our mental health as well and just see, okay, I did a cold plunge. Turns out it made me more anxious than less anxious because I just spent the whole time thinking, now I have to get in this cold water, and how long do I have to stay in here so people will not think I'm a total wimp, and then how long can I sit in the hot tub after without looking like it didn't work for me, but I tried it, right? So giving things a try, not being afraid or ashamed to say, I'm going to try this thing, try it on for my mental health and see if it's the right solution for me, I think is such an important part of the puzzle too. Okay, to bring us home, I want to come back to this idea of the relationship between our mental health and the health and the strength of our economies and communities. I just think these two things are so interconnected, not a connection that we always make, but they are so closely related. I think especially now, I think a lot of people are turning to community, trying to build supportive communities to see us through some of the difficult things that we are facing collectively. So let's hear one last clip from Ross about what our communities and what our economy would look like, could look like, if we all received the mental health care that we need and that we deserve.
If everyone did the right thing and got help earlier, we wouldn't have any psychiatric hospital. We'd be out of work. And that'd be a good thing. So I'm being a little facetious. I think what you would see is you'd have better learners, you'd have stronger workforce, a much more productive workforce. You have stronger social fabric in terms of people's engagement within their communities. And you would have a better sense of well-being where people weren't so anxious and frightened. And also a population that had a lot of resiliency in the tank. When challenges came up, they'd be able to kind of work their way through them as opposed to collapse because they had nothing left. So something like that, it'd be paradise.
I love that description. I think we'd all be happy to live in paradise. To close us out, Joni, maybe we'll start with you, and then Glenn, and then Ross, if you have any final thoughts. I'll pose the same question. What would our world look like? How would our workplaces, our families, our community, and our economy benefit if we prioritized our mental health?
Yes, it would be amazing. And I'm going to kind of reference my notes here because I have a couple things to say. For the workplace, when we provide children's mental health early, children with strong mental health grow into adults who are more resilient, emotionally intelligent, and better at collaboration. And these are qualities all employers want. So that's important. And then mental health issues that are untreated in childhood often become chronic as adults. So early care equals long-term savings. So I think that's important when we're considering the workplace. For families, parents and guardians have better mental health themselves when children's needs are being met, reducing cycles of burnout and stress. And mentally healthy children are more likely to grow into mentally healthy parents. So that is the impact on families. For communities, early mental health care support can prevent behavioral issues that escalate into more serious problems later. Studies have showed the ROI on that investment when you invest upstream and early. And kids who feel valued and understood tend to grow into adults who engage in their community. So you'll have more active communities. And then lastly, for the economy, good mental health in childhood is linked to better academic outcomes, which correlate to better jobs and higher wages. So there's my thoughts on that.
All things that I think we should want.
Yeah.
Glenn.
First of all, amen to everything that Joni just said. And for me, a lot of it comes down to the idea of relationships. So if we think about family, community, and workplace, these are contexts in which we have and develop relationships. We're not in isolation in any of those places. And good mental health helps us to develop relationships in each of these contexts. And relationships are fulfilling. We are more happy, we are more satisfied, we are more fulfilled, we are more productive when we have these good relationships. I'll leave you with one other resource that we've created through Stop Stigma Together. It's called the Love Your Mind campaign. And if you go to loveyourmindtoday.org, there's great toolkits. And the whole campaign about Love Your Mind is about developing a relationship with your mind, just like you would develop a relationship with a friend or a family member, that your mind has things that it wants to tell you every so often. And you should be talking to your mind, right? It's part of you, but it's also separate from you. So the whole idea is developing that relationship with your mind. And so we've got great toolkits in terms of mental health generally, but we also have workplace toolkits as part of loveyourmindtoday.org. And some of these toolkits are totally customizable to businesses and workplaces where you can literally co-brand and go in. There's newsletter templates, social media templates, internal communication templates that can be adapted to each organization's needs. So it's a way to foster that relationship with your mind and foster healthy relationships with others. To me, that's one of the biggest payoffs.
Ross, anything to add to your great answer here?
No, that was a great summary by Glenn. I mean, we are social animals. Relationships are everything. And so I just want to follow up on what Glenn just said. Go to that website and really, your mind really is open, and it takes some love and support to really kind of flourish. And so having strong relationships is critical. When people isolate, they get themselves in trouble. So yeah, reach out. If you're a little bit shy, if you don't know people, take some chances, reach out and develop some relationships that will help sustain you as you move forward. And the other thing I'd say is paradise is just around the corner.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on. Ross and Joni and Glenn, thank you so much for being here. I personally appreciate this conversation so much and your generosity in sharing your thoughts and your expertise. Let's give our panel a round of applause here. Thanks to all of you for being here. Also, we do have a couple minutes and some microphones up here and some friends who will run a microphone to you if you have a question that you'd like to ask.
I was doing my bachelor's degree in social work, and I had an internship. And we had this small thing happen of one of the coworkers, they suddenly quit, but because it was part of a social agency, we didn't want to break their confidentiality of why they left. But because it was such a sudden leaving, it really hurt the clients and it hurt the team because management wouldn't say what happened. Did she quit or was she fired? It was a vague platitude, and I'm kind of wondering, have you ever dealt with that or have any advice on how to resolve that kind of issue in the future?
Well, everything in the mental health field is team. It's team-based, and you don't do anything without a team. And when a team gets hurt like that, there's some healing that needs to take place. You hope organizations are transparent, but they can't really speak to the individual person, and it creates a lot of stress on everyone. And part of that sitting down as a team and working through it and having those conversations, and also with your leadership. And leadership's an interesting thing because leadership's all about trust. And if you know your leaders, if you can have conversations and you have trust, that helps kind of bridge some of that when things happen that are kind of out of your control, but it leaves you and your clients kind of out there on a limb. So I don't know your organization, but if you have that kind of relationship, you at least go back to your team and kind of circle back and try and help one another with that.
It's so tricky as a leader or manager. Often you know things that you cannot share with other people. And certainly in the mental health space, that's usually the case, right? And so the leader or manager is often best advised to say, well, I can't go into details of it, but then you can show lots of compassion for what everyone else is going through. Like, oh, this is so tough. I realize that now we're all taking on more work. Thank you for being flexible. Thank you for doing that. So showing the compassion and the gratitude as they deal with the downstream consequences of that shift is usually the best advice, right? I know that I can't tell you everything. Please know that I would if I could, and then show that compassion. And I think that, that grace that you were talking about earlier is so important for ourselves and for others to show the compassion.
Oh, lots of hands went up. Go ahead.
Okay. Have you found a need to specifically address grief and loss as you talk about mental health? I had a professor say, all change is loss. And I thought about that. For good good change is still loss. And I feel like as a nation, we do not do grief well. It is full of stigma. We don't talk about it. We want everybody to be better. We want everybody to be back. Are you back? Are you better? Because that's what we're comfortable with. So I'm just, in all this dialogue, those two words haven't come up. So I'm just wondering if you have seen that kind of emerging as a special need, grief and loss.
I'm looking at the mental health professionals over here to go first.
It's somebody who established the complicated grief clinic a number of years ago and did a lot of grief therapy. Yeah, it's the difficulty with grief is it's very individualized, and there isn't necessarily a common thread because it depends on your relationship with whatever you're losing. It depends about your identity and how closely your identity's associated with whatever that loss in, the support system, your own mental health. It's a fairly complicated thing, and really the way you get through grief is with a lot of support, a lot of journaling. You've got to kind of work on it if you've got really a complicated relationship with whatever you're losing, and that's kind of a different thing. But yeah, grief is a part of what we all deal with, and it comes back, and it's intermittent at times. It's not kind of a linear kind of you just do these things and all of a sudden, it's all better. So I wish I had a simpler answer for you, but it's complicated.
But a big component, I think, of our mental health and something that we also need to learn to talk about and ask for help. Even when I lost my father in 2023, very unexpectedly in an accident. And we're coming up on 2 years, and we do sometimes, or I sometimes think, oh, well, I should be over it by now. But that's my dad. That's a big loss, and it can come back in lots of different ways. So back again to this idea of giving ourselves grace and other people grace, I think is a huge part of that puzzle as well.
I would say from a management and leadership lens, I would first ask, what kind of grief is it? Meaning, is it an individual's loss, or is it a group or collective loss? So the losing of a loved one, that's usually going to show up as an individual at work. Oh, I'm going through the grieving process as I lost a parent, right? But as you say, change is a loss. Well, organizations are going through change regularly. And so a team or a department can be going through a collective kind of loss that, again, the manager would be good to show compassion toward of yes, this is part of the strategic plan. Yes, this is going to help the organization, but I know that we're losing things that we cared about. It could be clients, it could be part of the culture, it could be procedures that people have routinized that became a part of their routine. Oh, you're disrupting my daily routines. That can be a loss too. So that individual versus collective, I think, is one of the first things, and then showing that compassion and acknowledging what they're going through.
It's also symbolic and identity loss, which is part of that too. Who am I? Who's my group? What's all that. Yeah.
And being the leader and leading through that and being prepared for that.
I know I saw some other hands up. We are at time, but I hope you will come and chat with our panel afterwards. I just want to thank you again for being here. I'll remind you to follow Eccles Business Buzz, to subscribe to the podcast. We have not every conversation, I will admit, is as good as this one, but we have some winners in there. So I hope that you will tune in there and join us for our next events. Thanks, everyone.